It began with a notebook. A teenage girl sat on her bunk in a juvenile prison cell, pen in hand, filling page after page with her plans for the future. At first glance, it seemed harmless. She wanted to lose weight. To find an apartment. To make money. But as the list grew longer, darker words appeared. Weapons. Disguises. A Mercedes. Millions of pounds. And finally, murder. That teenager was Kemi Adeola. She was just 16 when she wrote down her so-called blueprint for life. 18 months later, one woman would be dead. And Kemi's words would no longer look like fiction, but prophecy. Kemi was not the kind of girl most people would expect to find in prison. She was born into privilege. Her father, Bola Adeola, was a wealthy property developer, once a professional boxer, worth around £10 million. Kemi grew up in comfort, private schools, expensive clothes, and every chance to succeed. But her life at home was fractured. Her parents' relationship broke down. Her father lost contact with her when she was only 11, sending money and messages through grandparents. By her mid-teens, Kemi's privileged life had taken a sharp turn. She developed a taste for crime, small at first, then escalating. Shoplifting designer clothes became a thrill, a skill she bragged about mastering. Each theft pulled her further away from the world of education and opportunity she had abandoned. Despite her upbringing, she left school with no qualifications. What she wanted wasn't a career or stability. She wanted wealth, fast, easy, and by any means necessary. In 2004, Kemi was just 16 years old when she found herself in Bulwood Hall, a juvenile offenders institution in Essex. She had been caught stealing once too often, and now the thrill of shoplifting had landed her behind bars. It was there, inside her prison cell, that Kemi began to write. An 18-page handwritten document, titled, Prison and After, Making Life Count. At first, the list looked like the idle dreams of any teenager. She wanted to slim down from 11 stone to 9.5. She wanted to rent a 2-bedroom flat. She wanted clothes, DVDs, and eventually, a Mercedes. But as the pages went on, the plans turned macabre. She listed weapons, petrol canisters, plastic bags, cling film, semi-automatic guns, stun guns, and even a bulletproof vest. She described disguises, wigs, sunglasses, and bizarrely, a full-body fat suit, weighing around 18 stone. And then came the darkest detail of all. Her main changes for a happy future required at least £3 million. And to get that, she wrote, she would need to rob and murder a wealthy elderly woman. Kemi's ideal victim was carefully sketched out. She must be wealthy, quite elderly, and defenseless, she wrote. Her routine would be studied. She would be followed. Kemi even imagined disguising herself as a student carrying out a survey, knocking on the woman's door with questions like, "Do you have guns to protect yourself?" Once inside, the plan turned gruesome. Cover her mouth. Threaten her with a knife. Force her to reveal bank details and the code to her safe. Make her write a fake "I'm leaving" note to confuse her family. And then, kill her. Kemi wrote the details without emotion. With your butcher's knife, remove her head. Wrap it in film to contain bleeding. Detach limbs one by one. When you have completed the task, put head and body pieces in a black bag. The deadline for this job was written down clearly, February 2005. When staff at Bulwood Hall discovered the notebook during a routine cell inspection in October 2004, alarm bells rang. The document was so detailed, so disturbing, that they confronted Kemi about it. Her response: "It's just a story. A crime thriller. I want it back." Kemi insisted it was nothing more than fiction, inspired by her favorite authors like James Patterson and Martina Cole. She told psychologists she dreamed of becoming a writer, and that the violent passages were only scribblings of a 16-year-old girl. But if that were true, the story would have ended there. Instead, only a few months after leaving prison, Kemi's fiction began to bleed into reality. Kemi was released from Bullwood Hall, and her father, still hopeful she could turn her life around, set her up in a London flat. But she had no interest in going straight. In Belsize Park, North London, Kemi moved in with another young woman. Together, they began working as escorts, charging up to £500 per night. According to Kemi, they could make as much as £5,000 a week. Her flat, when later raided, told its own story: piles of stolen designer clothes, stacks of pornography, sex toys, handcuffs, and revealing outfits. She wasn't building a respectable life. She was feeding her appetite for money, power, and indulgence. And her mind never strayed far from the pages of her prison notebook. On a cold day in March 2005, the nightmare written in Kemi's notebook came to life. Her target was not the wealthy, elderly woman she had imagined on paper. Instead, it was Anne Mendel, an 84-year-old woman who lived just streets away from where Kemi had once lived with her family. Anne was kind, gentle, and frail. That day, her husband returned home to find her at the bottom of their staircase, lying in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed 14 times. For detectives, the scene was shocking. But the evidence soon began to point in one direction. On Anne's hand, investigators found DNA. It belonged to 18-year-old Kemi Adiola. When questioned, Kemi had an explanation ready. She claimed she had simply helped Anne across the road earlier that day, which explained the DNA transfer. But her story quickly began to crumble. The truth was harder to deny. This was not random. This was not coincidence. This was the first step in Kemi's carefully plotted, dry run. The case against Kemi grew stronger. Her prison notebook, discovered months earlier, suddenly looked less like fiction and more like prophecy. And police soon uncovered more lies. She had been recorded trying to arrange a bogus alibi with a 16-year-old accomplice. In her flat, detectives found stacks of stolen designer clothes, crime books, and equipment that painted a portrait of a young woman obsessed with money and violence. In court, Kemi stood by her defense. The notebook was nothing but a draft for a novel, she insisted. A work of imagination, nothing more. But the jury did not believe her. The details were too precise. The murder of Anne Mendel was too brutal. The connections were undeniable. In June 2006, at the age of just 18, Kemi Adiola was found guilty of murder. The presiding judge suggested she may have even carried out the killing as research for her so-called future novel. Detective Inspector Steve Morris called her crime a wicked, premeditated murder committed by a callous, devious young woman. Her cold, calculated use of extreme violence beggars belief. For her father, Bola Adiola, the verdict was devastating. He described his daughter as spoiled, cunning, and obsessed with money. What she did, he said, was evil. Psychologists had once described Kemi as articulate, intelligent, even sophisticated. Some believed she had potential for a better life. But instead, she chose murder. Kemi Adiola entered prison once more, this time, not for shoplifting, but for life. Her story remains one of the most chilling examples of youthful privilege turned to horror. A girl who could have had everything, but chose to destroy. And it all began with a notebook. Kemi Adiola was only 18 years old when she was convicted of murder. Her victim, Anne Mendel, was 84. A teenager's obsession with wealth had cost an innocent woman her life. And her so-called fiction became a chilling reality. Please like and subscribe.